The old man, Darian, stood quietly at the edge of his land, his gnarled hands trembling against the smooth handle of his cane. His eyes, once sharp with determination, were now clouded with confusion and sorrow. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a long shadow across the acres he had spent his life cultivating. This land, his land, had been passed down through generations. It was more than dirt and stone to him. It was a part of his soul, his history, his blood. But today, that land was being ripped away from him. The man who stood before him, Marcus Hale, was a young, ruthless real estate tycoon, someone who could buy and sell anything, or so he thought. Darian had watched, helpless, as Marcus had manipulated his way into controlling the property around him, convincing the neighboring families to sell using threats, lies, and money. And now he was here to finish what he had started, to take the last piece of Darian's legacy, the land that had sustained him for decades. "Mr. Hale, please." Darian's voice cracked, frail and soft. "I've worked this land all my life. It's all I have left. You don't understand. This place, it's my family." Marcus Hale sneered, his polished shoes gleaming in the dying light. He had no time for sentiment, no respect for the old man standing before him. In his eyes, Darian was just another obstacle to be removed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder of the power he wielded, the deals he was closing, the empire he was building. The old man was nothing more than a nuisance. "I don't care about your family, old man," Marcus said, his voice sharp and cold, as if he were speaking to a dog he had long lost patience with. "You should have sold when I offered you the price. Now it's too late. The land is mine and there's nothing you can do about it." Darian's knees buckled, but he didn't fall. He clutched his cane tighter, as if it might give him the strength to stand tall once more. You promised me. You promised you wouldn't take it. Please, Marcus, I have nothing left. This is my home." Marcus's lips curled into a cruel smile. He stepped closer, towering over the elderly man. "Promises? Old men like you don't understand the business. This is about money, Darian. You're too weak to hold on to what you have, and I'm going to make sure the land is put to better use." He glanced around, his eyes scanning the surrounding fields. "This place is a gold mine. Too bad you couldn't see that." He waved a hand dismissively, as if the conversation no longer mattered, already turning toward his sleek black car parked by the side of the dirt road. "The deal's done. You've got a week to pack up and get out. I'll have the lawyers send you the paperwork." He didn't even look back as he spoke, his voice growing fainter as he walked away. "And don't try to fight it. You won't win." Darian stood there, rooted to the spot, his heart sinking into his chest. His body trembled not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of the injustice. His land, his birthright, had been taken from him, and there was nothing he could do about it. No amount of pleading, no amount of justice in the world could stop Marcus Hale from taking what he wanted. He had been a fool to trust him. Marcus had used his kindness, his old age, his desperation against him. There was no room for people like Darian in the world Marcus was building, a world where only the rich and powerful survived. Darian was nothing but an inconvenience, an old man who had outlived his usefulness. And then it hit him. The injustice, the humiliation, the cruel indifference with which Marcus had ripped everything away from him. Darian's mind raced, spinning, with thoughts of the past. How had he come to this point? How had his life, his legacy, been reduced to nothing in the blink of an eye? He had given everything to this land. He had poured his sweat, his blood, his heart into every inch of soil. His father had worked it before him, his grandfather before that. It was more than land. It was his identity. He slowly turned, his eyes drifting over the familiar hills and fields now marred by Marcus's ambitions. He felt a deep, bitter anger rising within him. This wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about the injustice, the arrogance of a man who thought he could take everything from someone who had no power to stop him. Marcus had destroyed more than just Darian's home. He had shattered something much deeper, something that had been with him since birth. But Darian was not as powerless as he seemed. He had spent years building something, even if it wasn't obvious to the world. Over time, he had learned things that no one else had seen, learned how to survive, how to outlast. Marcus's greed had blinded him to the truth. Darian wasn't finished yet. As the sound of Marcus's car engine roared to life, Darian felt a spark deep inside him. It was small, but it was there. The injustice had stirred something in him, something fierce and unyielding. He wasn't going to let this stand, not without a fight. But for now, all he could do was watch as the arrogant young man drove away with the land that had been his for so long. Darian's heart felt heavy, but there was something else there too. Something deeper, something darker. He wouldn't let Marcus win, not like this. The old man wasn't done yet, and Marcus Hale was going to regret the day he ever crossed him. The silence of the land was broken only by the wind as it whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of things to come. Darian's world had collapsed and the pieces scattered like dust in the wind. When Marcus Hale had taken his land, it was as if the earth itself had been pulled from beneath him. The house where he had lived for over 50 years was now just another property on a list of assets for the young tycoon. Darian had fought so hard to keep it, to hold on to something that had been a part of his soul for generations, but the law and the greed of men like Marcus had crushed him. The first days after the eviction were a blur. Darian moved into a cheap motel, his few belongings packed into a tattered suitcase. His savings had evaporated with the land, and soon his motel room became a prison of desperation. He had no family left, not after his wife passed away a few years ago. His children, grown and scattered, were busy with their own lives, none of them offering to help or even check on him. His phone barely rang, and when it did, it was the occasional bill collector or a reminder that he had nothing left to give. The hotel was a cold place, just like the world outside. It was where the broken and the forgotten went to disappear. The flickering neon sign outside his window cast a dull, sickly glow into the room. Darian would often lie awake staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. How had he become this man, the one who had been taken advantage of, betrayed, discarded like an old coat? He remembered the arrogance in Marcus's eyes as he took everything from him. The man hadn't even looked back, but Darian couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. He had no choice but to survive. Every day he searched for work, scouring newspapers and job listings, but his age was a problem. Employers didn't want a man in his 60s with nothing but a lifetime of farming experience. They wanted young, eager workers, not someone like him. The rejections came like clockwork. Each time he knocked on a door, it slammed shut in his face. "Sorry, we're looking for someone else," they'd say. "You don't have the experience we need." But what could he do? He wasn't a tech guru or a manager with fancy credentials. He was just a farmer, a man who had spent his life working the land, whose hands were calloused by hard labor. No one cared about that anymore. Nights were the hardest. The hunger gnawed at him. He could barely afford the bare minimum to eat. A can of beans here, a cheap loaf of bread there. Some nights, he didn't eat at all. The hunger was less about the physical pain and more about the emptiness it left behind. He would sit alone in the dim light of his motel room, watching the shadows stretch across the floor, and wonder if this was all life had left for him. The loneliness was even worse. Darian had spent his life surrounded by people, his family, his neighbors, the people he had worked with, but now there was no one. His calls to his children went unanswered. His old friends had long since forgotten him. He had no one to turn to. The silence pressed in on him, suffocating him slowly. But even as the days blurred together as he drifted further into despair, something deep inside Darian refused to die. There was a part of him that refused to accept this fate. It wasn't just about survival. It was about something bigger. His pride, his dignity, and his legacy were all on the line. If Marcus Hale thought he could destroy him, he was wrong. Darian might be down, but he wasn't out. One evening, as Darian sat on the cracked linoleum floor of his motel room, something caught his eye. It was a dusty old book, one of the business books he had once read years ago, back when he thought he might build something more than just a farm. He hadn't looked at it in years, but now in the silence of his isolation, it seemed like the only thing that might save him. He opened it, his hands trembling slightly, but he forced himself to focus. It was a book about entrepreneurship, about how to build something from nothing, about strategies that successful people use to rise above their circumstances. The words on the pages were simple, but the ideas were powerful. He didn't know much about business, but he knew how to survive, and maybe, just maybe, there was a way for him to turn things around. Every night after that, Darian sat in the dim light of his motel room reading and learning. He didn't have much else to do, but he had this tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could start over. He would go over the pages again and again, absorbing the knowledge like a sponge. He practiced the ideas, writing notes in the margins. There were days when his stomach rumbled, but the hunger couldn't stop him. His mind was focused on something greater than the emptiness in his belly. At first it felt foolish, an old man, like him, trying to learn business strategies. But as the days passed, Darian began to understand. The world had changed, yes, but that didn't mean he was finished. He had spent his life building something. He had learned to adapt to the seasons, to the land, to the changes that nature brought. Now, he would learn to adapt to this new world, the world of business and technology, of power and money. He began to make small, secret moves. He bought a cheap computer with the little money he had left and started learning about online businesses. about investing. He studied the markets, read everything he could find. Slowly, he built a network of people, not just friends, but connections, people who might help him when the time came. He didn't know when that time would be, but he knew it would come. As the days turned into weeks, Darian's patience began to grow. Every rejection, every failure, only made him stronger. He started to see opportunities where others saw dead ends. He kept moving forward, no matter how small the steps were, and every time he passed a construction site, every time he saw Marcus Hale's name on a building, something inside him burned hotter. Marcus was thriving. He was building his empire, expanding his wealth and trampling anyone who got in his way. But Darian knew something Marcus didn't. Empires built on greed had a way of crumbling. And one day, Marcus would learn the hard way that there was always someone waiting in the shadows. The first spark of Darian's comeback had been lit. It was still a faint glow, a flicker in the darkness, but it was there. He wasn't finished. Not yet. And when the time came, he would rise again. Darian's life was a delicate game of patience. After months of isolation, hunger, and rejection, he had finally begun to understand the way the world worked, or at least the world that had left him behind. He had grown accustomed to the quiet nights spent reading, the endless hours spent studying, but now something was shifting in the air. He could feel it. The power was slowly, quietly, slipping from the hands of those who had once held it over him. Marcus Hale, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his feet, continued to rise. His empire expanded, new buildings, new investments, new land acquisitions. He was a man of wealth and power, constantly in the spotlight, constantly surrounded by people who admired his success. To everyone around him, Marcus was untouchable, invincible. He had everything, and the world bent to his will. But Darian had spent too many years watching, too many years learning to be blind to the cracks in Marcus's armor. Marcus wasn't invincible, he was careless. And as Darian studied the world around him, he saw opportunities everywhere. He began with small steps. Quietly, without fanfare, he started acquiring the one thing Marcus had no interest in, the pieces of land Marcus had dismissed as worthless. Darian had no intention of building an empire of his own, at least not yet. His plan wasn't to make a quick fortune. His plan was deeper, more subtle. Every plot he purchased, every piece of property he acquired, brought him closer to something bigger, something that would take Marcus by surprise. In the dead of night, when the world was asleep, Darian would sit in the small office of his motel room, his computer screen the only light. He wasn't just reading anymore, he was strategizing. With the help of a few small-time investors he had met through online networks, Darian began to quietly flip properties. He didn't need to make millions. He needed to make enough to gain leverage. He knew Marcus's ego would eventually betray him, and when it did, Darian would be there, waiting. But it wasn't just about land anymore. Darian had become a man of resources. He had begun to understand the ways of business, the hidden corners where money could be made, the strategies that Marcus and others like him took for granted. Slowly, Darian's quiet investments started to pay off, but Marcus remained completely unaware. Meanwhile, Marcus was consumed by his own success. He had no idea that the very land he had stolen from Darian was slowly, quietly, slipping through his fingers. While Marcus expanded his empire, pushing others aside with the same ruthless arrogance that had cost Darian everything, Darian was building something much quieter. He was gaining allies, people who had once been crushed by Marcus's power but who now saw in Darian the possibility of something different. They wanted revenge too, and they were willing to help Darian in whatever way they could. Darian didn't need to fight Marcus directly. He just needed to watch carefully, wait patiently, and build. He would bide his time until Marcus's empire, built on greed and hubris, would start to crack. And when it did, Darian would be there, a silent force waiting to turn the tide. The first cracks came quietly, unnoticed by Marcus, but clear to Darian. It started with a whisper in the market. An investor, one of the many who had once worked with Marcus, had begun to pull out of deals. Small companies who had once done business with Marcus were slowly leaving, taking their money elsewhere. The reasons were never clear, but Darian could feel the shift. The companies that had once relied on Marcus were now quietly backing away, fearful of the man they had once seen as untouchable. One evening, Darian received a message from one of his new contacts, an insider who had once worked with Marcus's financial team. "I've been watching the market. We're starting to see some cracks," the message read. "He's losing investors. He's losing ground." Darian didn't react immediately. He had known this would come. It was only a matter of time before Marcus's arrogance caught up with him. The young tycoon had stretched himself thin, acquiring more than he could handle, and now the first signs of collapse were beginning to show. Marcus had become so consumed with his own success that he had stopped looking at the details. He didn't see the small companies walking away. He didn't notice the quiet investors who had begun pulling their funds. But Darian noticed everything. Each step, each move, was a clue to the bigger picture. Months passed and the signs grew clearer. Marcus's once thriving empire was beginning to buckle under the weight of its own greed. Darian could feel the momentum shifting in his favor. The land he had quietly acquired was becoming more valuable, and the investors he had carefully courted were beginning to see him as a viable alternative to Marcus. Darian wasn't trying to steal from Marcus. He was merely waiting, building, positioning himself so that when the time came, he would be ready to act. The first direct sign of trouble came one evening when Darian's contact sent him a message that made his blood run cold. There's a new player in the market, someone who's offering better deals, undercutting Marcus on everything. He's already poaching some of his clients. Darian's heart raced as he opened the message and saw the name on the report. David Carter. It was his name. His name was now on the lips of those who had once whispered Marcus's name with reverence. It was his name that was now being discussed in the boardrooms, in the investor circles where Marcus had once been king. Darian smiled to himself. The first phase of his plan had begun. Marcus, of course, had no idea who David Carter was, not yet. He had been too focused on his own expansion, too blinded by his own success to see the storm brewing. But that would change. Marcus would soon realize that his empire was no longer as untouchable as it once seemed. The power shift was subtle at first. Small clients pulled away from Marcus and Darian's phone began to ring more frequently. He was gaining traction, slowly but surely, building a reputation as someone who could deliver where others failed. Marcus, in his arrogance, had failed to notice the small cracks that had begun to form in his empire, and by the time he did, it would be too late. Darian was patient. He had learned to be patient in the hard years that had followed his downfall. He had learned that revenge, real revenge, wasn't about reckless action. It was about quiet, precise moves, and now he was playing the long game. Marcus would soon realize the cost of his arrogance. The pieces were falling into place and Darian was ready to take the next step. Marcus Hale had always believed that he was untouchable. His empire, built on ruthless deals and cutting corners, seemed like it would never fall. He had everything: wealth, power, influence. The world bent to his will, and anyone who dared stand in his way was easily crushed, or so he thought. But now, as he sat in his sleek office, his hands shaking slightly as he reviewed the latest reports, the walls were beginning to close in. Darian had been patient, far more patient than Marcus had ever imagined. He had watched, learned, and quietly built a power base that Marcus had never seen coming. It wasn't the kind of power that screamed for attention. It was the kind that crept in, unnoticed, until it was too late to stop. The first sign of trouble had been subtle, a handful of his most trusted investors pulling away. Marcus had dismissed it at first. He was the king of the game, after all. Who could possibly challenge him? But then the trickle of defections became a steady stream. Small businesses that had once done everything to please him were now quietly shifting their loyalty. And there was one name that kept popping up in the reports: David Carter. David Carter, a name that Marcus had never paid much attention to. But now, that name was all over the financial reports, the business deals, the investor lists. Darian had done what Marcus had never expected. He had built a network of his own, one that was slowly but surely encroaching on Marcus's territory. At first, Marcus had tried to ignore it, but soon, he found himself losing clients, losing investors, and most importantly, losing control. He had no idea how it had all slipped away. Darian had moved so quietly, so carefully, that Marcus hadn't seen the danger until it was almost too late. Now, as he sat in his high-rise office, staring at the numbers that didn't add up, Marcus finally understood what had happened. His empire was crumbling. The worst part was that he couldn't even begin to fix it. His assets were spread too thin. His investments were becoming liabilities. His trusted employees, the ones who had once been his loyal foot soldiers, were now jumping ship. And then there was Darian. Darian, the man he had destroyed, the man he had humiliated, the man who was now holding all the cards. The phone rang, snapping Marcus out of his frantic thoughts. His assistant's voice was shaky. "Sir, the board is asking for a meeting. They're concerned about the financials. They want answers." Marcus could hear the desperation in her voice, and it made his stomach tighten. The board had never questioned him before. They had always been at his beck and call. But now, they were losing faith. They were starting to doubt him. Marcus slammed, his fist on the desk. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour," he growled, his voice tight with panic. But as the phone call ended, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. His empire was slipping from his fingers and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Meanwhile, Darian remained calm. He had planned for this moment for years, and now that it had arrived, he wasn't about to let his emotions get the best of him. He had seen Marcus's rise to power, and he had watched it all come crashing down. The arrogance, the greed, the carelessness, these were the very traits that had doomed Marcus. And now, Darian was the one in control. He had built his empire, carefully, piece by piece. Each decision had been made with precision. Every move had been calculated. He wasn't in a hurry. He had learned the hard way that patience was key. Now as Marcus floundered, Darian stood tall, his position secure. It was time. Darian arranged a meeting with Marcus. He had everything in place. It was time for the final confrontation. As he walked into the sleek conference room, the same room where Marcus had once humiliated him, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. The tables had turned. He wasn't the man begging for mercy anymore. He wasn't the one who had been thrown aside. Now, he was the one holding the power. Marcus was already there, pacing anxiously. He looked disheveled, his usual confidence shattered. When he saw Darian walk in, his face went pale. You, Marcus stammered, his voice thick with disbelief. How did you? What the hell are you doing here? Darian didn't waste time with small talk. He leaned back in the chair, his posture relaxed, his gaze steady. I came to see how it feels, he said calmly. How it feels to be at the bottom. Marcus's face twisted with anger, but Darian could see the fear beneath it. You don't understand, Marcus snapped. I built this. I'm not going down without a fight. You can't. I can, Darian interrupted, his voice low and controlled. You thought you could take everything from me. You thought you could destroy me. But you didn't realize one thing. Marcus's eyes narrowed. And what's that? Darian's lips curled into a cold smile. You never saw me coming. The words hung in the air, and for a moment there was only silence. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands trembling as he gripped the armrests. You think you've won, don't you? He sneered. This isn't over. I'm not finished yet. Darian's eyes darkened. No, you're finished. You've been finished for a long time. You just didn't know it. Marcus's face flushed with anger. You can't take everything from me. You won't. Everything? Darian asked, raising an eyebrow. You've already lost everything that matters. Your empire, your reputation, your investors. I have everything now. I'm the one in control. The tension in the room was thick. Marcus's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. He had nowhere to turn. His empire was falling apart, and Darian had orchestrated it all. Please, Marcus's voice cracked. I can fix this. I can make it right. We can work together. We can. Darian stood up slowly, walking over to Marcus's desk. He picked up a pen, then casually tossed it onto the table. I don't need you, he said, his voice calm but final. And I don't need your empire. You've already lost everything. There's nothing left for you here. The realization hit Marcus like a tidal wave. His arrogance, his greed, his disregard for others had led him to this moment, the moment when his downfall was complete. The man who had once crushed everyone in his path was now on his knees, begging for a second chance that would never come. Darian turned and walked out of the room, leaving Marcus behind. He didn't need to look back. Marcus's defeat was already sealed, and Darian knew it. The power had shifted. The justice had been served. As Darian stepped into the sunlight, the weight of everything he had lost and everything he had gained settled into place. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about something more important, reclaiming his dignity, his power, and his future. Marcus Hale sat alone in his grand office, his fingers trembling as he gazed out over the city. His empire was gone. The luxury of the high-rise, the power he once wielded with ease, it all felt hollow now. Every deal, every connection, every false smile had led him here, to this moment. He could feel the weight of the fall pressing down on him, suffocating him. His phone lay on the desk, silent, ignored. His last few attempts to call in favors had gone unanswered. The investors, the partners, the employees who had once adored him, now they had all vanished. His business had turned to dust, and the truth was clearer than ever. He had built it on lies, and lies were always exposed in the end. His arrogance had been his undoing. For years he had walked through life as though he was untouchable, as if nothing and no one could bring him down. He had crushed anyone who dared to stand in his way, dismissing them as irrelevant, as tools to be discarded when they no longer served him. But now, it was Marcus who had been discarded, his name becoming a whisper in boardrooms and corridors, his reputation in tatters. The world had moved on and he was left behind, a shadow of the man he used to be. The knock on the door was soft at first, almost hesitant. Marcus turned toward it slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't ready for what was about to happen, but he knew it was inevitable. The door creaked open, and in walked Darian Carter. Darian looked as calm as he ever had, the same quiet confidence that had been there from the start. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone was enough to remind Marcus of the helplessness he had once felt, the very helplessness that had driven him to tear Darian's life apart. "Marcus," Darian said softly, his voice betraying no emotion. "It's over." Marcus's throat tightened. He couldn't deny it. There was nothing left. No more deals to salvage, no more connections to exploit. The city outside the window seemed distant, unreachable, just like the empire he had once controlled. I can fix this," Marcus stammered, his voice shaky. "There has to be a way. We can work together. You don't have to do this. Please." Darian's eyes never wavered. He had heard these words before, too many times to count. He had heard the pleas, the desperate cries for mercy, and each time, he had chosen to ignore them. Not this time. This time he wouldn't be swayed. "You had your chance, Marcus," Darian replied calmly. "You had everything, and you threw it all away. It wasn't me who brought you down. It was your own arrogance, your disregard for others, your greed." Marcus tried to stand, his legs unsteady, but he couldn't find his footing. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, his voice cracking. Darian took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "You meant every bit of it. You just didn't think it would catch up with you." Marcus's eyes darted to the phone as if hoping it might ring, that someone would come to his rescue. But the silence was deafening. Darian was right. The people he had relied on were gone. And now, he was alone. No friends, no allies, no empire. "You thought you could ruin me, destroy me," Darian continued, his voice steady. "But in the end, it was you who destroyed yourself. No one else needed to do anything. You did it all on your own." The room felt suffocating now. The walls seemed to close in, the weight of everything Marcus had done pressing down on him. He tried to fight back, but there was nothing left to fight for. No more power, no more wealth, no more respect. Darian had taken it all, and he hadn't had to lift a finger. Darian's eyes shifted to the door. "Security!" he called out, his voice calm but final. The door opened, and 2 large security guards stepped inside. "Please escort this man out,"